There's a growing chorus of critics out there who are blaming the man who's been at the center of the negotiations to try to achieve some ceasefire. The U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, our global affairs correspondent Elise Labott, has been following all of the diplomatic tensions right now, including some serious tensions between the U.S. and Israel. What are you hearing? What are you seeing, Elise?
Well, Wolf, the Israeli prime minister said today he's prepared for a lengthy campaign, suggesting Israel's gearing up for a longer conflict as hopes weaken for a ceasefire.
On the streets of New York today, a big show of support for Israel. But behind the scenes, tensions are high as Secretary of State John Kerry struggles to secure a ceasefire.
Any process to resolve the crisis in Gaza in a lasting and meaningful way must lead to the disarmament of Hamas and all terrorist groups.
But after a week of shuttle diplomacy, Kerry is under fire. The headline in Israel's leading newspaper, Haaretz, reads, "Reckless Kerry risks causing escalation." John Kerry ruined everything, writes respected columnist Avi Shavit. His proposal for ceasefire negotiations considered, quote, a strategic terrorist attack, viewed as treating Hamas's demands equal to Israel's security needs. And his attempts to bring Qatar and Turkey, viewed by Israel as friends of Hamas, into the negotiations, catastrophic. Pushback from the White House was swift and strong.
John Kerry, on behalf of the United States, has been working every step of the way with Israel in support of our shared interests.
Israel's ambassador played down the appearance of a rift.
The criticism of Secretary Kerry for his good faith efforts to advance a sustainable ceasefire is unwarranted.
Hamas leader Khalid Mashal gave a nod to Kerry's diplomatic efforts in an interview with Charlie Rose.
Mr. Kerry months ago tried to find a window through the negotiations in order to meet our target, to live without occupation, to reach our state.
On Monday, Prime Minister Netanyahu vowed operations would continue until the tunnels from Gaza into Israel were destroyed. He told CNN's Candy Crowley he was open to easing conditions for Gaza, but only if Hamas was disarmed.
I think you can't get social and economic relief for the people of Gaza without having assured demilitarization.
And the international community is growing more alarmed at the mounting civilian casualties. The United Nations Security Council met in emergency session overnight to call for an immediate ceasefire. In an intense phone call with Prime Minister Netanyahu Sunday, President Obama expressed serious concern about the humanitarian situation in Gaza, Wolf.
I'm sure he did. Elise, thanks very much. I want to show our viewers what's going on over Gaza City right now. We've been showing these images for the past nearly 2 hours. Israeli flares have been illuminating the skies over Gaza City. You hear, if you listen carefully, you hear the sounds of Israeli drones. They're flying over Gaza City right now. Maybe they're reconnaissance drones. Maybe they're drones with Hellfire missiles. You see a lot of smoke. You see a lot of a lack of power in the major parts of Gaza City right now. I don't know if the generators, power stations have simply stopped working or if there are some actions to kill some of the power in Gaza City. Let's bring in Martin Indyk right now. He's the former U.S. Special Envoy for the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. He's now the Vice President and the Director of Foreign Policy of the Brookings Institution in Washington. Martin, thanks very much for joining us. What do you think when, you know, I'm here, I'm in Israel, the criticism of John Kerry, if you read the Israeli newspapers coming from Israeli officials, is very intense. They think he went way too far in accepting some of the Hamas demands for a ceasefire. What do you say?
I'm frankly flabbergasted by the piling on here. Secretary Kerry was doing his very best to achieve what we all understand Israel wants, which is an end to the rocket fire and a humanitarian ceasefire that can lead to a negotiation in Cairo that can lead to the disarmament that Prime Minister Netanyahu has called for. He worked with the two parties that had some influence on Hamas, that's Qatar and Turkey. That wasn't an alignment with the Muslim Brotherhood or some kind of rookie mistake. That was an attempt to get Hamas to stop firing the rockets by working with the two parties that had some influence on them. This was not to undermine the Egyptian initiative, but it was in fact to reinforce it and make it workable. So I think that what Ambassador Dermer said is right. This is exaggerated, this is piling on, and they should all back off and express appreciation for the indefatigable efforts that the Secretary of State has been undertaking on their behalf.
Because the argument that you hear in Israel, I've heard it now myself from several high-ranking Israeli officials, members of the cabinet, and others, is that Kerry went too far. Instead of getting Turkey and Qatar to accept the Egyptian proposal as is, he went ahead and started accepting what Turkey and Qatar wanted, in effect undermining the original Egyptian ceasefire proposal, which the Israelis accepted.
For the people of the book, all I can say, Wolf, is that they should read the Kerry proposal, which has now been leaked, and compare it with the Egyptian initiative, and they will find that there is no significant difference between the two. It's an absurdity to argue that it was undermining the Egyptian initiative. It was a way to try to operationalize the Egyptian initiative by getting a ceasefire to stop the bloodshed, and that means stop the bloodshed, Israeli blood as well as Palestinian blood being shed.
What do you make of the fact that it looks that Hamas and the Palestinian Authority now have been brought much closer together because of all of the bloodshed? How will that impact, if in fact there is ever another Israeli-Palestinian peace process, how does that impact the peace process? You worked so hard for nearly a year to get it off the ground. You got made a little progress, but then all of a sudden it totally collapsed.
Well, we've got to start with first things first, and that is to get the ceasefire in Gaza, and then some kind of permanent arrangement in Gaza that puts the Palestinian Authority back in control there. Hamas and Fatah had, through this reconciliation agreement just before the Gaza conflict broke out, agreed that the Palestinian Authority should take control there. So that's the first step. In the context of putting the Palestinian Authority back in control, there needs to be the principle of one government, one gun. That is the demand of Abu Mazen, the leader of the Palestinian Authority. And that means that not just Hamas, but all of the militias in Gaza will have to disarm. And that needs to take place in the context of a broader process of opening Gaza and ensuring that there's international support for the reconstruction of Gaza. So it's a kind of three-point package that needs to be negotiated once we have a ceasefire in place. If that can be done, and it seems a long way off tonight, that the Palestinian Authority is in control, not just in the West Bank, but in Gaza, as Hamas had originally agreed, then it can become possible to look at the idea of resuming the negotiations, this time with a unified Palestinian Authority, with West Bank and Gaza, with it representing West Bank and Gaza. And that would in fact strengthen the ability of our ability to deal with the Palestinians and get a meaningful agreement.
Well, let's see if that can emerge from what clearly looks like a disaster happening right now. All right, thanks very much, Martin Indyk, joining us, the former Special Middle East envoy for the Israeli-Palestinian peace process.